Okay, hi there boys and girls. Just a very quick video to help you with this task. One thing we haven't looked at when we've looked at interpretations is the language of the interpretations. So that is something that comes up in the 16 mark question in Nazi Germany and is something that a couple of you have started to look at by having a look at the guides that you've been given, but it's not something we've explored as a class. So let's do that together now. Now, the question that you want to be doing is having a look at interpretation 1 and having a look at the language in that. Here, I'm going to do it for interpretation 2. Now, to start off with, this is very much like an English lesson. So when you go through like your poetry in your English classes, for example, you're picking out the language that the poetry is using to try to explain the effect that language has on the poem. That's very similar to what we're doing here with the interpretations. So together, let's read through interpretation 2. So it's from a book called The Nazi Dictatorship by Ian Kershaw, published in 1985, and it says the churches offered less than a fundamental resistance to Nazism. Their energies were used in opposing Nazi interference with their traditional practices. This was not matched by equally vigorous denunciation of Nazi inhumanity and barbarism. There's a lot of really big words in there. What I would advise you to do when you read through these interpretations when you're answering the 16 mark question is have a look through and just pick out the words that really interest you. And I've done that with, you only really need to do 2, I'd say, or 2 parts. So I've picked out 2 here. I've picked out this vigorous denunciation and also the part where it talks about the inhumanity and barbarism of the Nazis. It's very emotive, and I think that's what you really want to be looking for is the emotive language in the interpretation, because the historian's chosen to use these words to try to persuade you that they're correct. So it's almost like persuasive writing. And these are very emotional words that Ian Kershaw is using, and he wants you to agree with him. So let's really pick apart what he's saying here. Well, the first bit, the vigorous denunciation, what he's saying there, well, let's read the whole sentence. This was not matched by equally vigorous denunciation of the Nazi inhumanity and barbarism. So the vigorous denunciation, he's saying there that they're not vigorously resisting the Nazis. So, as I said in this box here, the church failed to consistently speak out against the Nazis. And the second part, I think it's really interesting that he said that they didn't go against this inhumanity and this barbarism. And that's really interesting because you would imagine that Christians and good Christians would go against a political party or a government that would put forward these really inhumane and they're barbarians. So this is really emotive language, and that's really something that I want to pick out here. So when you answer this question that I've asked you to do, so you're doing interpretation 2, I'm going to do interpretation 1 for you. How does interpretations 1 language help the historian's overall argument? Well, it wouldn't work unless we state the overall arguments. Let's do that first of all. And I've said here, interpretation 1 argues that the effectiveness of the German church resistance was extremely limited in Nazi Germany. Okay, now let's have a look at the language. So I've said, again, here's the point. Interpretation 1 argues that the effectiveness of the German church's resistance was extremely limited in Nazi Germany. And here we go. Kershaw's use of language helps to solidify this argument. He explains that the churches sat by and watched as the Nazi party carried out their inhumanity and barbarism. This makes resistance from the church seem particularly weak, as there are principles we would expect. As these are principles we would expect the church to speak out against. And I've gone on to my next one. Moreover, he explains that they failed to impose any vigorous attempt to oppose the Nazis. This suggests that any opposition that the church did make was inconsistent and therefore extremely ineffective. So what you can see there is I've made the point, what is this interpretation arguing? And then I've looked at the language and I've really explained what that is suggesting to me. What is Kershaw really arguing in this interpretation? So now I'd like you to try the same for interpretation 2. Pick out 2 bits of language there that seem interesting and explain why they have helped interpretation 2 make its argument. So I hope that makes sense. Good luck with that.